tracking that and finding systems to measure those conditions are a special part of our work, and it ties very elegantly in the work we do here at the collaborative.
Yep. Thank you. So there are 4 community-based organizations that cover northeast, western, and southeast of Philadelphia. And these are all kind of the classic overburdened environmental justice communities. And I'm new to my role, and I always approach, I'm also a skeptic of academia. This is my first time in academia. And I really approach it in a very skeptical way, and really we had some honest, brutal conversations early on about academia stealing intellectual property, academia not accepting consent as the basis of doing work, academia studying communities but not developing solutions led by communities. And we'll get into a little bit about some of the foundational principles and data sovereignty framework that's really crucial for doing any of the work. Then they're going to talk a little bit about some of the theory of change that we developed and our logic model. We talk about how we've done the work, how we really how do we build up this partnership in an authentic way, and really how do we look at in the theory of change to make sure that communities are fully funded in the way that no philanthropy, no governments have historically funded. So we'll get into that, a bit of a preview, and then we're going to close with the recommendations. I think you're probably the first crowd that's going to hear the recommendations. Our report's going to be issued in the next few weeks. The recommendations reflect about 2 years of work, reflecting all the community input that the community-based organizations have done, synthesizing that work, identifying the top priorities to really drive a climate justice, climate resilient plan. Can we move to the next slide? So this is the theory of change that, for some reason, the top is cut off. Okay. So this came out of, I guess, frankly, it might have been Toy who initially raised this concern, is that the way that governments, the way that foundations look at funding in a very limited way, and probably it'd be fair to say disrespectful way, of the value of a community-based organization. And so what this attempts to do is to lay the full breadth and value of what a community-based organization plays, and the role of organizations, academic organizations like this, to support that work. So I'll leave it to you two to kind of walk through it in the way that, however you'd like to do it.
So it's amazing because what this diagram represents is a great deal of work. And I think the slide probably could be 3 other slides. Right? But I think, part of what you see from this view, I would say from this view, is these sort of intersectional values of how much of this work is part of a process. And oftentimes, if you aren't able to deconstruct the process, it becomes totally unmanageable and totally overwhelming. We had some earlier panels where very new organizations talked about the overwhelming nature of diving head first into the litany of problems and environmental conditions that particularly impact vulnerable communities. And so I think one of the things that we've been able to really take a great deal of time reconciling is that it's a process of that should be measured, even from the geospatial acknowledgments of where these stressors are coming from. It should be looked at in terms of its interconnecting values. And as such, you see that we look at, from the historical side, we go into a level of engagement. It's really this sort of vertical approach that we look at this as a logic model, seeing all of these respective inputs that actually drive our outputs. And as a result, you make certain that in the very beginning of that there's this co-productive knowledge development that leads with the CBOs or the community-based organizations, where it's not all conceptualized, and then you're trying to bring people into the process to figure out what should be the priority of our engagement. In our modeling, that has been totally turned around so that the CBO's engagement is at the front end of the process. Not only that, you notice that the value of the CBOs and the expertise, the history, the credibility, their relationship in the community, their depth of knowledge is at the front end of the entire process. And so for those who are convening organizations and convening groups and are the conveners of nonprofits and CBOs and community organizations, that should be the paradigm, is to convene folks, have them tell you what their priorities are, help them assess what the priorities are, and then start to create a process by which you can look at policy, campaign, and long-term objectives, so that ultimately, and this is something the EPA, our EPA folks know, okay, when they have you put the logic models together, it's always those short-term outcomes, the midterm and long-term. That would be like, you wouldn't be able to read it if we did all that on one sheet. But ultimately, this process is an important aspect of what engagement should look like. You want to add to it?
I do. So from SEAMAAC's perspective, how we got to this model was as a direct result of years of disenfranchisement and also our relationship with university and larger organizations as community-based organizations. Oftentimes when you have a problem, they are reaching out to community-based organizations just to build the foundation, and then we become irrelevant as the depth of knowledge in terms of what we bring to the table. We're giving them the data. So data to us, we started in 2014, 2015, collecting our own data, storing our own data, and we realized that without our data, larger organizations really cannot monopolize the content, and that content will ultimately turn in terms of how you fund an entire program, how you make it a cyclical program, and then how you do outreach ultimately. One key word that we really were adamant about adding into this model was the CBO value. Every single step of the process must include either feedback from CBO organizations, review by CBO organizations, communications with CBO organization, and just overall approach in terms of who controls the data and who controls the messaging. So this model is, hopefully there's more people that eventually will see this model, but it is very revolutionary. When we are talking to funders, they cannot fit this model into their current infrastructure, and it will change the game in terms of where you see the value. So in the collaborative or the collective that we're considering right now, it is just a new formula for ways that funding is going to be trickled down. So it's going to be for both university settings as well as CBOs. So everything is included in terms of the funding structure model, which is what we go back and forth on every single meeting. We end the meeting with, where is this additional funding coming from? Because a lot of this is just a plan. So we're trying to be a little bit more active in terms of how we sustain the work that we do from all partners that are kind of affiliated with Collective.
So I just want to highlight a few other things. So this dotted line reflects the typical phase of philanthropic or government funding, right? And what I call the transactional phase, right? You approach a CBO to do a specific activity, you expect a report, and we're done, right? What that misses is, well, how do you actually invest in solutions, and how do you make sure that the communities are invested in the long-term follow-through of making sure those policies are going to actually realized on the ground, and the corrections of policy that are necessary, and the capacity of community-based organizations. And just the bottom blue, which I forget. So in addition to valuing the CBO is actually financing the CBO in its full value, right? Having formerly worked for a community-based organization, one of the things that I found funders don't really respect is the value of a community-based organization's relationships with their community. That is built up over decades of work. How do you actually value that? and funders, and we have some really, friendly philanthropy, but I'm going to call out philanthropy. Philanthropy has really migrated to kind of a business model of show me outcomes in the near term, right? But if you want to change systemic problems, decades of redlining, I just want to score. If you're not investing in this, you're not investing in justice, right? The investment in community-based organizations to monitor and adjust over time. That's how you reverse systemic investment. Investing just in this, you're just investing as a symptom. And just a diagnosis of the symptom. That's it, right? And so obviously, we support, and I use the word intentionally, support kind of once the community-based organization develop the priorities, how do you translate that into recommendations? You're going to see a report we're going to publish in the next period of time. We put together a student team to take those recommendations to build out a policy. We're now then going to build out a campaign where the communities are the lead with the campaign, meeting with city-state officials around the policy recommendations, and then looking at the long-term resourcing for implementing those policy recommendations. Anything else before I go on to the next one? Let's go to the next one. So I know that this is, I don't want to go through all of these, right?
Now, let me just say this. For a guy who's antithetical to the academic world, look what they've done.
Now, I just want to highlight a few things. Maybe you could talk about kind of the CBO activities and outputs, and I'll talk about the university.
Right.
Okay.
So
I'll get you back to that.
So, as again, being able to see yourself as an active entity in the process and not just a client, right? Oftentimes when CBOs come into a process with the source of need, they're coming from the perspective as if I am a client. But the truth of the matter is that every process has its needs because all processes have vulnerability, they have strengths, they have weaknesses, irrespective of the size of your organization. Whether it's a government organization, whether it's a big green organization, they still have vulnerabilities, but they're not coming with the historical basis by which they have been marginalized to such a point where you don't think your engagement is equal and of value. And so I think what happens when you look at this model of inputs, from the very beginning it's suggesting that the leadership of the CBOs and their expertise has equal value even of those who are able to measure and to share of the historical and traditional relationships of what those conditions have been in those respective communities or even models from other cities. And that's what academia does. Academia gives you the ability to see models that where you may see yourself within it or may not see yourself within it, but it shows you the context that you're operating in. It allows you to see it from a bigger perspective. So it enables us to take this sort of 30,000-foot high view of community engagement and then narrow it down to very specific outputs that communities can measure, engage, and participate in on their own. The ultimate goal should be, in our modeling, that we work those universities and we marginalize them over time. Because at its best, it's giving those CBOs the capacity to not only assess his needs, to identify his needs, to prioritize his needs, but have the tools to help mitigate those concerns as they arise within this respective organization. So I'm just covering the input and the activity side, and maybe you want to jump on the outputs if you like.
Well, adding to the activities and output, this model, we use it currently at SEAMAAC in terms of language. So for us, it has been very beneficial because contract language, as we see it when it comes to dealing with like larger entities, is where you have the leverage. And oftentimes, smaller CBOs do not have the capacity to have that language, something prescriptive when you're dealing with like a larger entity. So if you take any aspects of these activities and output, you can draft a new MOU. And in that MOU, these language will strengthen your ability to control the partnership ownership and also have a leverage. So for the outputs in terms of what we expect from the university level would be, even when you're talking about guiding principles, where do CBOs have input in the outcomes about guiding principles of how the university runs their program? How do we maintain data sovereignty? So, for example, it goes into a vacuum. Every single data that we submit to a university level, we want to be able to have the ability to craft the messaging that goes out, translate the data that's going to be received, and then also deal with the communication side. So this, I think, we redacted it to maybe a one slide, but we use it personally for all new organizations and organizations that we work with. If you have never had an experience dealing with contract or any type of law, use this as a model, build your MOU, and you will have the upper hand in any type of contract.
Before you go, you triggered a thought about what we did in this particular setting around having a discussion about who owns the intellectual property around our work. Now imagine having that kind of conversation with the university. They lose their minds. I heard brain cells pop. But Manny, to his credit, had the courage to go right there. Didn't blink when we said, you know what? This is our work. This is our intellectual property. We need to preserve it and have access to it, etc. But I'll share this with you, and he hasn't been in this discussion. Now, it's not necessarily an easy task to manifest these changes. We have 3 contracts. The Overbrook Center has about 3 contracts with Drexel. And 2 of them are EPA-driven contracts where we're the PI, and Drexel's our sub-awardee. Their brains cannot compute that at all. They were like, well, this is what, here, you need to execute, we'll execute the contract after you sign it. I'm like, it's our contract. We execute it after you sign it. Oh, okay. Oh, yeah. You're right.
Day that they're not able to take care of the business at home before they kind of deal with larger, broader issues. So we're trying to solve and alleviate some of those issues, but the longer term is to identify leadership within the community so they can do advocacy for themselves. But we are implementing policies both in South Philadelphia, North Philadelphia, West Philadelphia, because we're going to tackle this issue all at the same time. We may not do it collectively, but this issue will be addressed, and it's something that we're going to find alignment on. So the collective has not been able to find one issue that we can deal with currently, but that's going to be phase 2. We're building out the plan in terms of building consensus within the collective so that when we do finally address an issue that is pressing, that is relevant to all the communities that we serve, and we can build consensus on that, that's what we're going to tackle first.
You want to add that?
No, I think ultimately laid it out quite nicely that ultimately one of the outcomes of the work is to influence policy. And I was in a meeting yesterday with the mayor's cleaning and greeting staff. And it's amazing that people are now thinking about how to invest in solution. What it looks like, whether it's the frequency of collection, whether it's the accessibility to collection, particularly the more harmful things that we collect. Really, very impressively, folks deconstructing this whole waste model, the waste stream modeling. We think about whether or not, since everybody's now ordering online, and do we have excessive cardboard now, and what do we do with it? And one of the issues that came up in discussion is, do we need to create micro-enterprises to address a condition that we weren't prepared for, right? We have reusable products, and we have a lot of non-reusable products. Should the government get into the business of incentivizing single-use utensils, for example? If you have a coffee shop where 90% of their customers, if they're the type of shop where they sit inside, why not have reusable materials that people could use in that particular establishment? But you do need a policy to help incentivize that kind of behavioral change. And so ultimately, these recommendations will lend itself to broader policies that can create conditions to reduce waste and reduce stress and reduce pollution at a neighborhood level.
Yeah, and I think and the report's going to lay out kind of the systemic conditions, but also having the policies being grounded in systemic conditions, but also near and short term. So I'll just highlight the extreme heat issue. So government is investing good, valid investments in tree canopy. When will tree canopy have an effective cooling effect? You know? And how do you protect the most vulnerable for extreme heat days? How do you provide those interventions now? How do you build the public health capacity of diagnosis? There's a national problem of diagnosis of acute consequence that has chronic effects. So we want to look at both the short term. Most government, if you look at, just do a quick Google search about heat interventions, they're all long term. And what the community said, well, that's good, but what about the short term stuff? So that's what we expect to do, like, build out these policies that is balanced in short and long term. Next slide, please. Yeah.
Well, that goes to a point Rachel left out, but you know, there's these initiatives where people are creating these sort of resilience hubs so that folks can very intentionally and currently address some of the environmental impacts on neighborhoods while the systemic changes are taking place in a broader sense. You have these sort of micro opportunities to address some of these concerns.
So if I had formatted these slides correctly, yeah. It's a next. So I'll try to remember from memory. So integrated climate justice approach. So the one is basically the dashboard. You could talk about the dashboard. The second is establishing the link between climate change and respiratory health, right? The third is focused climate justice solutions based on the most vulnerable communities. So you want to talk about the dashboard first?
The dashboard, contains the data that we need to do our work. A lot of the times, when you are integrating new leaders, new supporters into your program, you have a tough time really explaining the work that you do. There is no overarching system that really outlines the issues that are affecting the city. You can kind of, touch base in terms of, particular locations with high crime rate. All of this is really documented. So the database will allow individuals in real time to either contribute to it or use the data that is necessary in order to advance the advocacy work that they are intending to do.
Yeah, the only thing I would say is that, it's a proven fact that you're better able to change the things you can measure. And once you get to the point where we can create this sort of understandable and colloquially expressed dashboard or report card, if you will, of environmental conditions, then community folks will become more accustomed with the idea of knowing if a certain behavior is moving in the right trajectory of progress, or is staying static, or is becoming worse. But I think without giving people the score, they just see one big problem. And part of where the solution is deconstructing that one big problem with a variety of cumulative impacts that are looking like one big problem, but really are hosts of different issues that may require a different set of solutions to solve them. Mm-hmm. And I think that's part of what is an elegance around having a systematic model for addressing cumulative impacts and concerns in these sort of distressed communities.
And what we envision is the indicators and the dashboard is going to be community-owned to hold governmental interventions accountable. Like how is the government interventions impacting these indicators? And then how can that, and then the word that you talk about, council member competition, I think the term they use.
I was going to say that, right, but the flip side of it is get them something to brag about. Yeah, we got the lowest amount of increases in our community, that kind of thing. So it works two ways. It helps the community to measure environmental impacts in their community, but it also gives those legislators and other folks something to brag about once you do it well. Yeah. I'll take credit for what you've done.
Yeah, so I just want to focus a little bit on what you can't see there, but what it is to flip the model of environmental protection. There's a whole long culture of what I call trickle-down environmental protection. It's embedded in the Clean Air Act, especially. I would say, and now we're seeing it in climate action. But the theory goes, we'll develop a solution that benefits all of society, and then we assume the most vulnerable will benefit. And that's how we got into this problem, right? So we want to flip that model. We want to say that you protect the most vulnerable first, because by protecting the most vulnerable, all of society will benefit, right? So one of the things that we did for the mayoral race is we identified by block lot numbers where the investment should go if you're truly about reversing the systematic behaviors, right? And then tracking that block lot investments against the indicators that we're talking about. You know, so next partial slide, please. So without going into all of this, you know, this is really about kind of, it's about along the way, if you don't build community leadership, and there's a bunch of things, but you guys, Generic could talk about that, you know.
So the next time he's going to put pictures with flowers and things like that on it. But no, I think, you know, really probably should make some time for more of a conversation with the audience. But again, I think you're starting to see a pattern that we're giving a great deal of consideration, one, to the model of our engagement, to what the structure looks like for the output in our work, and how we're measuring it. So we're looking at the measurements, we're looking at the engagement process, and we're looking at the outcomes of the deliverables and the work that we're doing based on the priorities that our community, the community sets. And so that's why it looks a little, you know, generic and high level, but ultimately there are specific issues that are being talked about here, whether it's heat, whether it's domestic toxins. In some parts of our communities, we have flooding. In other parts of our communities, we have brownfields and vacant lots. Philadelphia has 40,000 vacant lots all throughout these sort of depressed communities. Do you think there's vacant lots in high value neighborhoods? I don't think so, right? So vacant lots are in these areas is considered not high value. But that's a really a big problem. You know, our organization, we as a pilot actually took on the responsibility to try to address some vacant lots, and you know, we got ourselves into a little bit of a pickle. We didn't know it was a brownfield. It was really toxic, really hazardous, but we stuck with it, and we got the community involved, and it has totally changed the trajectory of the community by, one, signaling that there was a willfulness to have investments that are specifically designed to improve the quality of the life where you live, work, and play. And that's an extraordinary signal when you talk about engagement with communities. There has to be some evidence that you're there as a value add, because everything suggests that you're not.
Mm-hmm.
When you think of the history of universities coming into communities, it's not. It's very extractive.
Mm-hmm.
And in environmental justice part, we talk about that extractive science. We're talking about a more productive, equitable relationship where it's not as extractive, and that there's some very specific value that academic institution provides. I'll give you an example. We are working on a process, well, maybe it's a little premature to talk about, but I'll talk about it. Where we've been doing a great deal of work around, and we were doing this with another colleague, another university, Penn. We've actually have measured soil quality in about 4,000 locations in West Philadelphia. And we're measuring soil quality. And so for any of you that do anything around that work, like 400 parts per million is probably like the threshold. You don't want to go above, you don't want to walk around in anything above 400 parts per million. We were sampling sites with like 3,000 parts per million.
Of what?
Huh?
Of what?
Of lead and soil, right? And so this is like cross street from playgrounds. It's like problems hidden in plain sight. Wow. And so what came out of that was, you know, why don't we create an opportunity for community members to bring soil samples to the center, and we work with our university partners, and they can measure soil quality to give people some indication as to what kind of hazard they might be coexisting with. And sure enough, it became this extraordinary process by which not only did we help people mitigate the fact that they had this hazard around them and hazard around their children, but we were able to give them now recommendations on how they can remediate and mitigate the problem. And then talk about the broader issue is, well, have you looked at your paint? Or have you looked at your service line? Is your service line lead service line? Do you have other conditions that may, in effect, present itself as a hazard to you and your family? But working with universities and having the tools and having the labs really create a unique, very identifiable basis by which the relationship is enabled us to say, this is what your strategic value is, this is what our strategic value is, and working together, we can get good results for the community as a whole.
So unless you want to say anything, open to questions?
Just quickly, I think on the administrative side, the community leadership building component would be to invest in individuals from the community and also individuals with institutional knowledge. The model has always been to kind of like, create job positions, and then there's a high turnover rate. We have specifically focused on keeping talent and also training new talent. So I think that's always been our focus, every single conversation, in terms of the new model has been, you need to invest in more individuals so that if you have one success story, it really elevates your advocacy work. Yeah, I would say like that's probably the most important thing that we've kind of adopted in terms of figuring out long-term path. We've learned this by way of making a lot of mistakes. In the last administration, we were doing projects for FDR Park, which is one of the larger green space in South Philadelphia, and it was by way of doing surveys about what the community wanted. Right. The community wanted community gardens. They wanted more playgrounds. They wanted better trees. So the master plan that came out 2 years ago, or 3 years ago, decided that they wanted to add 16 AstroTurf soccer fields in terms of where the trees were. Instead of fixing a $5 million, and we may have differing opinions on this, Jerome, but instead of fixing a $5 million pump system, they decided to redo the entire thing for many more millions. We were able to find advocates, leaders from the community that formed the Save the Meadow Coalition. So they're holding individuals from the city elected officials accountable in terms of reading what the plans were, figuring out who made that input. Nobody asked for soccer fields. I'm just letting you know. So like it's an education component to it, but also we will invest in individuals with learned, trackable experience so that they can proliferate any type of advancement that we need in terms of the EJ space. The one thing I would notably ask for Drexel is that I had a similar plan to do this in Georgetown before Drexel approached SEAMAAC. So you're ahead of the curve. But EJ is the next phase. So institutions and universities are really adopting this new phase because you can tie corporate dollars in terms of the EJ work that you do because you're buying consensus from the community, and that's how they want to touch base. So we know we're going to be used for our ability to persuade our constituency, but we wanted to make sure that we can adopt the policies that we want to advance, the missions that we need to.
Sure.
Thank you. So we'll take questions. Anyone have any questions? Maybe introduce yourself and then. You speak up a little bit?
Looking at life and soil a number of years ago, and I was wondering, you said you're with Drexel University, correct?
Well, it's with Drexel.
Yeah, so how are you guys collaborating with other universities locally who are also collecting the same kind of data?
I probably heard like half of what you said.
Sorry, how are you guys collecting with other universities?
Use your indoor voice.
And then collaborating with other universities locally who are collecting the same exact kind of data and making sure that it's publicly and readily accessible.
So here's how it usually works. The institutions we find are very insular. So I can't speak for these guys. I don't know what that was my sort of initial. Manny, I won't blame him because he came from a different space. He parachuted into Drexel. But the real issue is I was actually in the universities what are you doing with all this data you're asking us to help you collect? And we're introducing you to community members and folks who are letting you take samples out of their yard. And folks are like, doing? What do you mean, what are we doing? Yeah, and the whole idea was research for research sake. The whole notion that it was a tool to help advance quality of life within communities wasn't necessarily their objective. I think over time that's sort of shifted a little bit, and that's where federal involvement matters, when you have a NOFO that sort of spells out that you should have community engagement, these are the desired outcomes, this is what should be happening, this is how you should involve communities around the efficacy around the work. All of that kind of stuff is something that's being developed. But to your point, I never saw, I was never driven by a university for that purpose. However, I will say that we worked with Villanova to do the sampling. We worked with, Penn was probably more prolific. It was the SEAMAAC, the Center for Environmental Excellence and Toxicology, right? And so you worked there, you know, Maryland? Yeah, Howard, yeah, Maryland, Howard, and Rich Pepino, right? And Rich Pepino. Yeah, so we worked with, they probably were the leaders in the work, but Villanova was also, you know, doing work as well as Drexel. But they were nowhere near as deliberate and intentional and creating inventory of data around it. But what we've done is we've actually have gotten other grants to allow us to share that data with communities and engage communities around projects using our methodology to help them with their projects. For example, we had an EPA community science grant, and one of the criteria was to help communities improve land health in their neighborhoods. And so what we did was help them actually do assessments on the vacant lots in the community around soil quality. But ultimately, we were going to find at least one of those lots that they'll be able to transform. So we went through this entire process of helping them gain site control while working with their city council person and local government. We brought in organizations like Jefferson University to help them redesign and to reconceptualize the use of the lot. And the Barnes Foundation actually has a horticultural landscape architecture. Brought Barnes in, and they were helping to conceptualize it. So we created this methodology from control to repurpose to remediation and ultimately redesign. And so that's our approach. There's scales of use that are in many cases outside of the capacity of a CBO, and you start talking about something the government should be doing, right? And we're very clear about that. And that's the thing that I want to make clear about our work as a nonprofit organization. We are aware of the fact that there are some things that we are good at and some things that we're not good at. And we're really, really good about making sure people don't burden us with problems that aren't ours.
Yeah. Short answer to your question is that it's based on the way that contracts are drafted with the university. It's before your project even existed, it was a concept in somebody's mind. So in order for that to be facilitated, it had to evolve from internal about a sustainability model for the institution. So you were working for Penn. Penn has, you know, its vital subsistence plan in terms of figuring out, okay, this grant is for us, this data sovereignty is for us, who are we going to share it with? We're definitely not going to do all this work and then share it with another university.
Right.
Because at the end of the day, the money factor comes from the recommendation that is yielded from the result that is, I guess, the combination of the results that is extrapolated from your research project. So it is just a recommendation. What we're proposing is that through the collective, we're actually going to change the problem. So the new model in terms of how grants are written, and we just heard this back from another funder, they cannot fit us into the model because they're looking for a 3-year plan. They want a plan by the end of year 3. We're like, this issue is an ongoing issue. You cannot fit this square peg into a round hole. This model doesn't work. So we have a very different approach in terms of how that is manifesting at this point. But universities, it's the dollar and cent. They're all competing for very small amount of dollars. If you want from a city-wide investment, some of these programs are only in the hundred thousands of dollars per year in terms of grants and funding. If you want to do a macro level project of that sort, you're looking in terms of like minimum $5 million.
Other questions?
Hi, I'm Stephanie Hassanali with Pennsylvania Department of Health, and I was recently connected with Jerome, so I'm excited to work with you. I was just wondering, this is really incredible work, and we've touched on this a little bit, but it's just so much work. So we really appreciate that. But what plans have you made for sustainability of this collaboratory and collective, and then how willing are you or interested in trying to do like a train the trainer or something with other universities to try to get them on board? Because I know the publishing thing is amazing, but I have a hard time believing, especially for new faculty, that they'd be able to take on something like that because their promotion is tied to publishing.
So maybe I'll give a shot at both of them. I mean, funding. I mean, this cannot be sustained without funding, you know. So we're actively looking at funding the next phase. We built out in like multiple phases of approaches. We've communicated that to funders, and you know, resilience planning is the new thing, right? And so we've taken the work and it's like, well, the point T made is like, well, if you're going to invest in resiliency, you have to invest in the resiliency of the collective, right? So, you know, whenever I talk to funders, if you're not investing 5 years, then what outcome do you want? Do you want a photo op, or do you want outcomes? You know, so I'm really trying to push kind of the funding kind of approach. I mean, in terms of universities, we have. I'll just be kind of direct about it. Only a small universities really believe in this model, right? So for those of them, there are like the New School in Manhattan. There's a number of schools that really believe in this kind of a justice-based model, and we convene on a quarterly basis. I also convene with a bunch of others who are frankly not as proactive, you know. But we are trying to build out, you know, trying to spread the word. In Climate Week, I'm going to be speaking to a bunch of universities about this model, you know, and we're talking to folks locally, UPenn, Carnegie Mellon University, see how we can. I've taken an approach. We got to stop this competitiveness among universities, you know, to the point made earlier. It's like you're competing for data for your own purposes, right? And it's like there's expertise that we don't have, that other universities have, but I would say can't attribute this comment to me, but I will say this. NSF fundamentally creates competition among universities, fundamentally creates this data hogging, right? Fundamentally does not respect authentic community-based leadership. And I've spoken to senior level people there. You know, I think some staff are really trying to do the model, but you're not going to get the sharing unless NSF, which is the largest funder of universities, really shifts outcomes. You know, NSF, you know, there's a whole pipeline of funding for publication that NSF fuels. Not funding for solutions, you know. Unless we shift that model, you're going to see this competition. Well, I can go on and on. I'm not going to do that. You know?
I think Jerome and I have, and also Maddie, have figured out that our organization, we have shareholders, and the shareholders are the constituents that we serve. And time again, I think we meet, even though it's not in our contract, we, you know, add additional meetings. This is not part of the contract. You have to find organizations that are invested in terms of the future that they want to see for their constituents. And that's what this collective, it's revolutionary and also radical because, you know, one of the contracts that we have is with the city. And for the MOU is that none of the sub-recipients are ever to have a meeting together. And that's what I think our TCM contract for truancy case management across the entire city of Philadelphia. It's written into the contract. We cannot meet. And so the idea that, you know, we all are experiencing the same we're going to address this issue, whether or not it is funded, because it is kind of an individual issue as well as a community issue. So it's affecting me, Rome, Maddie, as much as it is affecting the constituents that we serve. We did our election protection work, and one prime example is we do election surveys after. So I think the primary, we got 634 reports. The biggest issue that people care about was the environment and also their own physical health. And that was because we had the forest fire from Canada, which created smog. And it's not even about anything, political. It was just like, I could not breathe. And then the fact that we had latex in the school pool. So drinking water was number 2. We did not predict that, but people viscerally remember those things because it affects them. So we will continue to do this work, and I think that's kind of like the new model where you're having individuals and organizations that are invested in this work, whether it is directly or indirectly. We're going to have to do something about it together.
Any other questions? None?
I guess my question would be, when you're saying that you guys release a report, how will communities such as someone like myself have access to that? Like what, I guess, outlet would that report be released on? And again, I would just have to commend you guys on the work. It's funny that you're saying what you're saying about academia. It would have been great if this information was presented before some of these groups partner with these universities for this community change organization grant, because as you're mentioning, you see, I'm sitting here and I'm interpreting, I'm saying now, it seems like you're telling me that you have ownership of what I'm going to go out there in the community and produce, you know what I mean? So I can't use it further for if I want to apply for grants because it's your property now.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying? So just for the little bit of crumbs that you give me, it's not worth it, because the particular work that I'm going to present to you, I would say that I'll trust my chances of getting more out of this investment of time and being based in the community than you guys, that I will receive in partnership with you guys in the short term. You know what I'm saying?
And what you're describing in a broader sense is something that the earlier slides suggest, is that if you're not an equal participant in developing whatever the framework of your relationship looks like, you might eliminate your capacity to be able to have that independent use of the research information if you don't negotiate that up front. But Mike's an attorney, right? You got to negotiate that kind of thing up front. And when nonprofits are thinking, one, you have to believe that you have the capacity to do that.
Right.
I mean, one of the biggest, the most significant thing we had to learn to do over the years is to say no. Right? With all of the bells and whistles that some of the potential partners were coming with, we had to say no. I'll just give you one example. I had this one group, I'll leave them unnamed. And they said, well, we want you to do this thing with us. They brought all of these different bells and whistles. It's going to be great, and here's the money, and blah, blah, blah. They were really good at promotions. They said, we'll promote your work. And when we were looking at the agreement, it said that we will own, what did they say? It was something crazy. We'll own your image, your words, your concepts, and perpetuity. I'm like, I don't live that long. To the universe. I'm like, what the heck is that? So you mean that you think you need that kind of control now? Then what would it look like later, right? What does that relationship look like later? And they said, what should it be? I said, well, we're going to now have to let our attorney look at all of it because we don't trust you. But it's going to be plain language so that it's reasonable for both parties, right? Sometimes that's where it begins. That you don't have to be a scholar of law if you make things simple enough for yourself to understand. I mean, there are legal constraints that you have in certain processes, but some of these things are just outside of the scope of what any reasonable person would want to engage himself in. And so I think Ty talks about that a lot, is what you negotiate that allows you to be able to have the freedom and the flexibility to contribute fully and expect to be respected in the end of the process.
So I'm assuming we'll make the publication or the recommendations available. We still have to figure that out because we're offering some final edits. But part of another grant that we wrote for was resource sharing and also education. So it happens at a macro level at this point. So for example, within this collective, SEAMAAC is working on a one-pager to find funding for education on illegal dumping that we're trying to push out for the entire state. But we're going to start on a local level as well. So it's not, it just takes a little bit of time. But the information will be shared readily with everyone who.
And once we're ready to share, we could post on our website as well as, and our website is linked to all of the community-based organizations' website. So, yep.
So I have a bunch of questions.
Introduce yourself.
Oh, Mike Ewall, I'm founder and executive director of Energy Justice Network based in Philadelphia. So it's interesting to hear there's a Philadelphia Climate Justice Collective. It sounds like something that West Philly anarchists would have put together, but really that's not who was behind this. So I'm curious to know more about who was involved, how they were chosen, how others participate, but actually save those for offline, because maybe I can, because I came in late, you already answered those, and I'm happy to get answers on that later. Let me ask the ones that are more interesting for now. The decision-making on what issues to prioritize. Like when I hear illegal dumping, immediately alarm bells go off in my head because I know that that's considered a safe issue that the city can work in, that when there's government funding and other stuff like that is one of the issues that's like sanctioned and okay to touch. Yet if it's something like, why don't we shut down this big toxic polluter in Brightsburg, which is the biggest air polluter in Philadelphia, that is untouchable. So are things like, why are we sending our trash to be burned in the biggest incinerator in the country in Chester, Pennsylvania, when we end up breathing the pollution from it? That's a little bit more untouchable than illegal dumping, right? And so when it comes to prioritizing like the impact of an issue, like how much people are actually hurt by it, what the gravity is, versus what the interest level is. Because if you go to the groups like the ones we're talking about in South Philly and say, well, what matters to you? They're going to say, oh, litter, trash. And so you solve that issue by burning it in Chester and giving people in Philadelphia asthma and cancer. So that is the disconnect to me, because people don't know that when they fix and clean up their issue, they're making their health worse and harming an EJ community. But to them, the visible part is being solved. So how do you reconcile this need to prioritize the actual impact versus what people's perception is without an education process on the bigger picture to influence that? And the last related question is, are there barriers in terms of your funding or the political ties, the university involvement, that make it hard to take on issues that involve directly fighting polluters or lobbying for certain changes? Like with illegal dumping, I know that's not just average people putting stuff in some place. Most of it's construction waste. Most of it's from developers that are contractors that are doing that. And because there are no requirements for there to be roll-offs and the permits for building buildings and tearing them down. And so that's a systemic thing that can be done at the city council level. But usually that's not, the solution focus is not there. It's just like blame individuals or get some enforcement and get some guy busted, but don't actually fix the system that causes it.
Yeah. So I know he gives the sign for time's up. We can have conversations on the side. I'll just give you may want to talk about how we came up with the recommendation. Do you want to do it?
Yes. So we can talk off of this. The collective is just, there was another green
living plan.
Green living plan, which had many more individuals and also organizations on it in terms of recommendations to the city of Philadelphia. From that, there were organizations. So we have two other organizations that are not present here today, but it's overarching in terms of like the geographical locations of Philadelphia that we encompass. So like Mantua, you also have Esperanza, who's not here today, SEAMAAC. So the data collection portion that we did is about 175 surveys so far. We're going to probably start to eclipse around 200 and see whether or not we need to do one on an annual basis. And then we also have focus groups. So the data breakdown for that is across all age group, all ethnic race, all college or education level. So it's fairly diverse in terms of the individuals that we survey. From that, the example that we use in terms of illegal dumping is just one out of like 35 other recommendations. So the collective right now, we're trying to build an infrastructure that we can have long-term funding so that we can invest in individuals and leaders, that we can train, educate to deal with individual issues. We have also established the fact that we need to establish some level of flexibility in terms of our recommendation plans and which issues we tackle first. So we have not done that second portion, which is what we're going to do in year 3 and 4, which is figure out which issues we want to tackle first. When it comes to the issue just specifically of like illegal dumping, we understand that it's not the only issue that's affecting